How do you perceive your world? Are you relying more on your visual? Are you relying more on your auditory? Are you relying more on the feelings and your intuition? What are you doing to perceive your world? And how are you communicating that to others? Today, I want to explore your representational system. And in short, I'm going to call it your rep system. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a tongue twister. Your rep system is all about the five senses, how you perceive the world, how you take in information, and then therefore, how do you communicate to others what's important to you? When you know your rep system, you are able to very quickly identify what is keeping you stuck, what patterns are you getting in that creates the success that you want. When you know your rep system, you're able to also identify that in others and be able to communicate to them in their model of the world so that they feel heard, understood, and valued. So it's very, very, very important when it comes to NLP. Let's get started within the slide training here. So as I've already stated, your representational system, your rep system, is all about the five senses and how your mind takes in information from your experience of this reality. So obviously we have the five senses. We see, we hear, we feel, smell, and taste. And we use these senses to basically decode all the information that is coming in all around us in our daily lives. We use our five senses to communicate. We use it within our body language. We use it to be able to communicate to others what our needs are. We use it to be able to describe what's going on for us. And we also use it as coaches to hear what's going on for our clients. Now, we're all going to use all four of these distinct rep systems, but we choose to have a predominant one that we lean more into, one that's a lot stronger than the others. So today we're going to look at your visual, your auditory, your kinesthetic, and your auditory digital. They're also referred to as your modalities. And so when we have a look at how these are working for you, we can check in about how you're communicating here again in this reality. When information reaches our brains, it gives us meaning and forms subjective experience of this world. And this is our representation, otherwise known as our perception. Although we use all of our rep systems, we tend to have that preference, as I was saying. So I know for myself that I'm more visual than the other rep systems. Statistics suggest that in a developed country, most of us are visual. We've got about 60-ish% visual people that are looking for the images, the pictures, the visuals to make sense of their reality. We've got about 20-ish% of the auditory people who are listening out for the sounds. That's what's the most important to them. And we've also got the kinesthetic people who are really feeling into the energy around them. Knowing this, it's absolutely worth bearing in mind when you are marketing your particular business. When anybody's marketing their business, it is so important to create the visuals to be able to describe what it is that you're talking about. In your marketing, it's also important to also describe the feeling that people will get from the outcome from working with you, as well as the way that it sounds. And when you are able to use all of the rep systems in your marketing, you basically target everybody there to be able to be inclusive, to come and check out your business. So here we go. By understanding your rep system, you're able to be able to communicate better to not only to yourself, but to others. You're able to understand, okay, this is the picture that I have in mind. And when you're talking to a client or your partner, you can listen out for the way that they perceive their reality and choose to use your language to match their rep system. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who's more kinesthetic, so they're more feeling based, then, if you're making plans for the weekend, how does that feel? Versus my partner would have to say to me, what does our weekend look like? And start to use the visual words to be able to draw in my curiosity. So as I've already stated, but just to help your unconscious mind grasp this a little bit stronger, frequently we use visual, So you'll see that written as V for seeing, visual, auditory for hearing, kinesthetic for feeling, and auditory digital. So when you think about the educational system, they often teach teachers to be able to create the pictures, describe what it sounds like, describe how it feels. But in NLP, we take it one step further and recognize that there's a part of our mind and there's a big part of the population who are very, very much auditory digital. And this is about criteria, their knowledge, pieces of information coming together. So think about the IT guy who really likes, the pieces of the puzzle more in their mind about the logic than the person who wants the visual. In the rep system, we also use the olfactory for smell and the gustatory for taste, but I won't be looking at those today. It's very, very unusual unless you're like a wine taster or some some sort of a professional in the baking industry. These two are not very strong for most people. So I do have a questionnaire on my website. What is your primary representational system? And that will give you the scores on where you sit within this knowledge. So let's get started. Let's work out how the rep systems helps you build rapport. So obviously visual people and the visual rep system are the things that we see in our mind or our reality. Visual people, you'll spot them a mile away. Visual people tend to do things a lot more quickly than others. I know for myself, I'm a visual person and I have to be mindful to slow down my language, not because I'm nervous and I need to speak a million miles an hour, but because the picture in mind, the message that I want to convey is like this massive big canvas in my mind, and 1,000 words describes the image that I want to convey to you. So visual people will often speak quickly because there's so much to describe in the picture. They will often speak at a higher pitch and they will often sit more erect in their chairs, eyes up, and usually, again, breathing from a shallow part of their lungs. Again, they've got so much to describe. It's sort of like short breath, let me describe it. They tend to gesture a lot more near their head height, throwing their arms around. Have you noticed I'm doing that? My NLP trainer would have to like sticky tape my arms down, like, Claire, present, not describe. Don't be too distracting. Generally they dress quite neatly because the way that they look is very important to them. They're assuming that visual is important to you. So if I present nicely, if I have a nice looking car, a clean looking home, clean marketing, then this is going to communicate that this is the type of person that I am, somebody who's clean, visually appealing, all of those things. To a kinesthetic person, they're not so fussed, like, what are you talking about? But visual to visual, they're like, yeah, I get that. Visual people are less distracted by noise, so their auditory isn't as strong, although I can hear the birds in the background, but it doesn't take away from the picture in my mind about what I'm talking to you about. Physically, visual people tend to be more thin or wiry. Their hands will more so be thin, like think of the piano player. Their handwriting is more likely to be sharp as it's written quite quickly. They've got a lot of things to describe. This is just sort of typical. The other one to keep in mind with visual people is that while I said earlier that they sit more erect in their chairs, this isn't that fight-flight response where they're like ready to leave, but they're just more engaged in the picture and the describing of the thing that they've got in mind. So rep systems, visual people, you will notice them from when they talk more from the top of their lungs, faster rate, gesturing with their hands. You will hear predicates, you will hear in their language to see, to look, to watch, the vibrancy, the images, everything that describes a picture, that's the wording that they're going to use. And when we get to the fun eye patterns, ooh, you are going to see them look more towards the top of their head, because this is where the images are. I've got a whole cinema up here and I just want to describe to you all the different pictures. And so that's typically where within the holographic part of our nervous system, that's where the pictures are for me to convey this message. And again, the predicates: see, look, picture, view, appear, show, dark, foggy, anything that describes the picture, you know that the person in front of you is in their visual rep system. Okay, let's pivot to the auditory. Auditory people, think of the musicians, think of people where sound is important to them. So it's the sounds or words that we hear either externally or even in our own minds. Okay, so they breathe more from the middle of their chest. So their hand gesture, they will use their hand gestures, but not extensively, not like the visual people. You know, maybe there's a bit of a rhythm that they want to convey, but otherwise they don't tend to use their hands to describe the picture or the sounds, I should say. They can repeat instructions back to you easily, and they are going to be very distracted by noise. Their auditory is quite hyper aware of what's going on, what do I need to hear for, to be able to make sense of where they are in this reality. Interestingly, the auditory people, they tend to tilt their head to one side to just sort of take in as much information from you as possible, which is quite interesting, because when you think about being back in the schoolyard, or sorry, being back in the school classroom, and teachers saying, okay, look to the front, you know, look at me so I know that you're hearing me. This is a visual person talking to an auditory child. And so the auditory child may just turn their head to listen, and that's the way that they're taking in information. But to the visual person who doesn't understand this, they consider that to be rude. So you need to really be mindful about the way that the auditory people are recording and taking in information. They memorize things in steps or sequences and like to be told things and hear feedback in conversation. So this is where if you're having a conversation with an auditory person, they like to hear back, like, okay, what you're saying, that sounds like da 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 da. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, like that's exactly what I'm trying to say. They tend to use auditory predicates such as that rings a bell, or that clicks, you know, that makes sense, or no, that makes sense is AD. That sounds good. And they can be excellent listeners. They often enjoy music and the spoken word. So these people are going to lean into listening to podcasts more than needing to watch a movie. Their handwriting is probably going to be a bit more rhythmic and fluid between the visual and the kinesthetic styles. So yeah, auditory people that think of the music, think of the tone, think of even the way that the words sound is going to be important to someone. You know, you may say like, oh, that looks good. And it's sort of like, to them, the tone wasn't excited enough. It's sort of like, does it look good? Like, does it sound good? Is it good? So they're listening for all of the detail of what's being said and not being said. So the auditory people, you're going to notice that they breathe more in the middle of their chest. So they're going to take in more of a breath when they're communicating with you, to be able to create that rhythm in their voice when they're talking to you. Their speech rate will be medium. You know, they're enjoying the sound of their voice. They're enjoying the sounds around them. They're going to use very mild hand gestures. You will hear the predicates of hear, sound, sounds like, or loud. You will notice that they're going to look towards their ears to access the auditory. So whether that's looking towards how does that sound when they want to create a piece of music, or looking for how does that sound remembering that time when I heard, you know, the concert, or heard mum say XYZ. So their eye patterns are going to look towards their ears. And they may tilt their head in conversation just to take in more input. And as I've already said, the auditory predicates: hear, silence, listen, resonate, deaf, harmony, waffle, echo, all the words that represent sound. Okay, kinesthetic people. The kinesthetics are based on emotions or sensations, including touch and texture. We are talking about feelings. We are talking about emotions, that made me feel sad, but we're not talking about emotions as much as the way that it feels. Okay, kinesthetic people typically breathe from the bottom of their lungs. And in fact, kinesthetic people, because they work at a slower rate, that can drive the visual people nuts, because the visual people want the stimulation and they want the picture. And so when you're in a conversation with a kinesthetic person, they don't hesitate to take their time to give you a hug. They don't hesitate to take their time to and really get into that earthy kind of sensation of the feelings around them. So they don't mind taking their time to really breathe into the bottom of their lungs. And you will often see the kinesthetic people just like the way that their stomach goes in and out, because they're going to work so much more deeper. When they speak, there are long pauses between statements. And of course, the visual person wants to interject and like, da, 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 and they're like, no, I just need time to process and to feel into that. And they process things that are said to them to determine the feelings that they get. They respond well to touch and the physical rewards. They use few hand gestures and generally stand closer to the person, like they don't mind this. Visual person's like, no, let me take in all of you. The kinesthetic people are the ones when you arrive at an event, they all want to hug and it's sort of like, oh, yay. For some reason, that gives them the sensory input that they need to feel comfortable, whereas the visual people and the AD people may like, I don't understand why we're doing this. Um, the kinesthetic people are more likely, if you're in that masculine, handshake, they're more likely to give you a firm handshake, to gesture their strength in their comfort in being in their company. Physically, they tend to be more solid looking, and generally their hands are larger or chunkier. What comes to mind is, thinking of my nana, who was so much of a hugger, bit more chunky, and there was just so much more of her to hug and love and all of those yummy things. They are interested in how you feel and memorize by walking through the process or by doing it. So if you're going to teach them anything, then they actually want to feel through the steps. Whereas an AD person may want, the step-by-step criteria instructions, the kinesthetic person may just need to walk themselves through the process to be able to memorize it. I'm about to say their handwriting can be a bit more firmer because they're using their hands, they're feeling into what they're writing. So the expression on the page can be an emphasis or a description of the message or the feeling that they're trying to convey. The kinesthetic people tend to breathe at the bottom of their lungs. Their speech rate is slower. They use a few hand gestures. They don't mind standing close. You will hear them using predicates such as feel, rough, gripping. And interestingly, when you look at them as the observer, they are going to look towards their bottom left. So when you're looking at them, it is you as the observer to your bottom left. And I have no idea if my camera is mirrored or what it's doing, but basically they're going to look down to the left, their right, to access their feelings. And you think about it, right? If you've got somebody who's describing a stressful situation, you will see them look down. It's almost like they're going inward to access their feelings, and they're just brewing up this the memory of what it felt like to be in that experience. Interestingly, when you bring their eye level back up, this dissipates a lot of that heavier emotion that they're going through. So if you're working with somebody who does have a level of depression or anxiety, keep their eye level up so that you can coach them through what it looks like or feels like or sounds like without that old story. Just a bit of coaching tip there. And so the kinesthetic people often have a deeper voice, takes longer pauses. You can spot them a mile away. They'll give you a hug within the first 10 seconds of meeting them. The predicates: touch, grasp, hard, rough, vibrate, soft, lift, hot, cold, all of the feeling words. Okay, the auditory digital, the AD people, as we call it. Auditory digital people are very orderly, statistical, procedural, and even that self-talk. So there's a lot of criteria going on in their mind that they are assessing. Okay, so the auditory digital people, these are people who like order, statistics, procedure, instructions, criteria. And we often talk about auditory digital, or AD, as self-talk. So it's that inner criteria that we're going through. Auditory, auditory, auditory digital people, we're going to stick with the AD. The AD people are quite fascinating in the way that they work. And in fact, my husband is very AD. So they're going to place a lot of value in logic, instructions, and detail. You give them the instructions to the IKEA catalogue and they have absolutely got it because they've got the step-by-step criteria of what's expected to them. AD people tend to be those in the financial industry, the insurance industry, the computer coding guys, even people in the military. Give me the steps and then I can perform. They often use words that are abstract with no direct sensory link. So often the kinesthetic people, the feelings people, the visual people, the auditory people are listening for a sense that they can attach to what the auditory digital person is saying so that they can put meaning to what they're talking about. And in fact, the AD person is actually going to avoid using the feeling words because there's a bit of a disconnect there. They understand that people do feelings, but they tend to make a picture in their head of themselves having a feeling and describing the criteria around that or analysing that, but they're not going to be describing the feelings in that moment. In fact, feelings can be very confusing for them. So it's interesting to note that a lot of the AD people, somewhere in their history, they may have actually turned off their feelings. You know, maybe they were a really emotionally involved child and then they worked out that to be in your feelings means that I get hurt, I don't understand my intuition and the way that it feels versus what the grown-ups are saying. So sometimes the AD people will actually have switched off a lot of their feelings to then just go into the science, the facts, the to-do list, the logical, to avoid that emotional confusion. They may or may not be aware of that, but a lot of the time AD people have had that particular experience. There's a reason why they've gone into the criteria so much. Very, very, very scientific, based like the evidence, like the facts. Yeah, AD people, they're quite interesting to coach. They're interesting to coach as well because they you describe the outcome that they want or describe an outcome and they're not so attached to it either working or not. It's sort of like, yeah, let me just do the steps and I'll be able to create it, or I'll pivot and I'll do different steps. So yeah, very different way of coaching an AD person. AD people tend to breathe, lowering their abdomen. Their speech rate can be slower. So similar to the kinesthetic people, where they're sort of taking their time to work through the steps in their mind. The visual person wants to like jump in when they pause, and it's like, no, give them the space to actually work it out. You know, as a very quick trivial example, you know, doing the food shopping with my husband, I'm a visual person. Okay, we're going to do this, da, 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 and it's going to be in this order. And David would need actually some time to actually work out, okay, we've done this, okay, what's next? He's more assessing what's going on than just like moving very quickly. The predicates that AD people use are things like understand, sensible, criteria, logic. They will access their AD by looking opposite to the kinesthetic. So they will look to the bottom right. When you are the observer, you will see them look to the bottom right, so their bottom left. It can be a little bit confusing, and again, I'm not sure if my camera is mirrored. So the AD people are often looking for criteria. There seems to be a bit of a to-do list down here, how the steps get put together compared to the feeling people, where it's sort of looking to all of the feelings. So yeah, watch for eye patterns on where they're getting their information from. Other clues is that they're often detached to the outcome because they'll just pivot. There's no sort of emotional meaning to whether or not they fail or not. They're just like, okay, we'll pivot, we'll do it a different way. As I've already said, the AD predicates: sense, learn, experience, analyze, think, process, understand. So thinking about what areas of your life you have struggled with in regards to communication, whether it's within relationships, work, career, trainings, can you recognize that the other person you were communicating with may have not matched your rep system and vice versa? So as an example, the feeling person who comes in, who wants to hug the AD person and who wants to just feel into the feelings, and the AD person is like completely like in a daze or overwhelm of like, hold on, what are we doing here? Like, give me the steps, what's expected of me. And so there can be this mishmash of miscommunication. The visual person may come in and want to describe the picture to the auditory person. The auditory person is waiting for the sounds and the rhythm and give me a sense of how my body should be responding to this, whereas the visual person may be describing the big picture on the outside. It can be very, very confusing if somebody else is speaking in the opposite rep system, or in an opposing rep system, I should say. So again, some people are focused on the AD facts of how things come together, and think about that architect, think about the engineer, think about coming together with the builders. Some people are focused on the visual appearance of the outcome. So when you think about being in a business as a builder and looking at the floor plans, I've noticed this myself when I've hired tradies and things. It's sort of like, I'm describing the picture, can you create this? And they're like, well, the numbers are da, 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 da. Is that what you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know the numbers, like I don't care, like can you make the picture? So there's an immediate miscommunication clash. However, if the tradesperson was trained in NLP as a business person, listening out for the predicates of the client, let's say like an electrician, he walks into a woman's home and she's like, I just want the visual feeling to be really alluring and vibrant and warm and welcoming. You know, when you walk in, I want the lighting to da. And he could come into that space and go, yeah, wouldn't it be great if like you walked in and the home was lit and it was welcoming and it was like warm and it gave you that glowy sort of sensation? She'd be like, yes, we are talking the same language. Like, here's lots of money. Go and help me create that sensation for me. Hopefully that's a bit of a trivial example, but this is what I'm talking about with when you know what you're listening for with your clients, you can use their rep system and start to speak to them, as we know with rapport, like we like what's familiar. So being able to match somebody's rep system, very, 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 very powerful. Another fun example, the kinesthetic person may want to recreate the feelings and the sensory experience they had as a child, and they feel into like how mum had the the organic, natural growing Christmas tree in their home, and the smell of the pines and the way that it felt to just walk into the home and have that feeling of Christmas and the abundance and the gifts, versus the auditory person who just doesn't think that the real Christmas tree is so important. It was more about the stories and the music. So they may have this miscommunication clash because she wants to spend the money on the real Christmas tree, the natural Christmas tree, and he's like, no, let's just buy one that we can use for 40 years, save our money, and like let's focus over here on the stories and the things that we can create, you know, that way. So This is, again, just another quick example of how the rep system can create miscommunication and conflict. Now, if we were in the classroom together, I would ask, I would bring forward a student and say, okay, what color was your bedroom growing up? And I would immediately expect somebody's eye patterns to go up, as I was saying, to the visual remembering. The observer's right. And so they're going to access that remembering, that memory of what color was their bedroom growing up. And then the next question I'd ask them, if a green bowling ball fell on your foot, what would that feel like? And again, in the classroom, we would see somebody sort of drop down their eyes to the kinesthetic to be able to access what it would feel like to have such weight fall on your foot. What are the first few notes of your favorite song? Now, this question is going to get everybody to look to their auditory right. So auditory remembering, to remember, okay, what was my favorite song? What were the, you may even see their head bopping, but we're getting their mind to access that quadrant, that rep system of their auditory. Curious, what would your boss or best friend look like in a clown outfit? And you'll see their eye patterns go up to visual create. Everybody's going to do this. Everybody's going to use the rep systems, whether it's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and AD. Everybody's got that map in place, and we can watch their eye patterns to be able to identify where they're retrieving that information. So not only are we listening for the predicates that they're using, we're also looking at their body language, we're looking at their eye patterns to be able to work out what is their strategy? What are they doing to be able to create the communication that they're creating? And finally, if a lion could sing, what song, what would it sound like? And of course, our eye patterns are going to go to auditory create to be able to sort of create in our minds, like, yeah, we're thinking of Lion King, like what would that actually sound like? So the visual people are going to grasp this knowledge quite quickly to be able to look for the eye patterns, and the AD people too, in fact. The auditory people are going to be able to grasp listening for the predicates quite naturally. So depending on your rep system will depend on where your strengths lie. So the tiny involuntary movements of your eyes play a valuable role in determining the way we are thinking. It is possible to tell how someone is thinking by their eye movements, but not what they're thinking, just the how. In addition, you can voluntarily cast your eyes in a certain direction to aid you in either remembering something or creating a new idea. So the specific movements of the eye are called the eye accessing cues and can be seen in the following illustration. So I'm going to go into more detail about that map, about where people's eye patterns go or their eye cues go, to be able to illustrate to you which direction means what. So a standard eye pattern of a normally organized person looks like this when you are looking at them. So they're going to have their visual remember up the top right for remembering. The opposite of that is going to be the visual construct. So think about an artist thinking about what they're going to paint on the canvas, what that could look like if we redesigned the home. That's what the visual construct is all about, is like it hasn't happened yet, so I've got to construct it, versus the visual remember. The auditory construct, again, if I was going to create a piece of music, what could that possibly be like? And somebody's eye patterns are going to go to the auditory construct, versus the auditory remember, which is thinking about, what did that person say to me? How does this fit in with what I have to do? The auditory remember is to the right as you're looking at them. Kinesthetic will look to the left, and they're accessing their feelings. And the AD people are going to look, or all people are going to look in these different directions to access that information. So we all look to auditory digital when we're looking for criteria. But, somebody who's, we hand that IKEA instruction catalog to somebody who's more visual, they're probably going to actually look at the visual construct of like, does this picture match what's in front of me? Whereas the AD person is actually going to read the criteria of what, put this piece here into section B, blah, blah, blah. Rarely, rarely. And I actually haven't encountered anybody yet. Some people may actually be reverse organized. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but you may just keep in mind that sometimes people's map can be the opposite. But always, always, always just come back to that original map where towards the normally organized when you are starting out. Build up that skill set, build up that confidence before you start entertaining the reverse organized. So the way that you would identify that, if you were skilled at the eye patterns, or when you're skilled at the eye patterns, when you ask them these questions, like what was the color of your first bedroom? If they start to look to the visual remember, okay, we need to like go in a little bit more to work out, okay, is this how your eye patterns are working? So again, this is the map of your eye patterns, eye accessing cues, visual remember, auditory remember, AD on one side, visual construct, auditory construct, and kinesthetic on one side. This is from the observer's perspective. So we're not trying to get all messy and going into their visual right. It's when you are looking at it, it is your right. Just on a sidestep, when we think about just that, in fact, a quick learning strategy, why is this rep system important? Why are the eye patterns important? Well, if we are teaching a child how to learn spelling, then we are going to utilize and access the way that the mind naturally works to build in strategies of success. So for somebody who, think about a little child, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, starting out school, learning words, the words and learning spelling is very, very, very visual. So we're going to access their visual remembering. And the way that I did it when I had my 4 little daughters, I would put them in a bath. They were quite happy. They were, quite in that relaxed sort of space. And so I would use their spelling words and get their eyes to look up towards their visual remember so that their brains can actually see the word and take it in as a feeling good space of like, yes, I'm going to remember those words. Compared to a learner who is having a lot of difficulty, you often see them look down, they see the spelling words, they're looking down, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. And it starts to anchor in the negative association to learning. So if we can get somebody feeling good and remembering, then this is going to help them learn in a good state. And we are learners for life. We want to get this right at the early stage. Something that we'll go more into in our trainings with the strategies and with the predicates. The strategy for a good learner looks like this at the bottom. They need to be in a good feeling state. So that's that kinesthetic. Obviously we're not going to have everybody in the bath to do learning, but as this example, they're feeling good. They're in a good mood, bubble bath, happy. That needs to be in place to be a good learner. Then to be a good learner, we then bring in the visual. So this is the picture and we access that visual part of their memory. Then you may even speak the word, or do speak the word so that they get it auditory. And then the next thing is like that praise, like, yes, awesome, you did a good job. So that's actually the shortcut to somebody's empowered learning strategy. Now, to get things a little bit more complex, we're going to split this into 2 now. Everybody has their primary representational system. I am more visual, so this is where I lean into, I like color, I like things to look a certain way. That's my primary rep system, and you'll have yours too. Then what we actually need to keep in mind is some people play out their lead representational system. Now, the lead representational system is the way that they echo back to them the instructions that they have heard. So if I'm going through this particular training and I ask you a question, I state to you, can you think about a relationship that you had where there was miscommunication? Either your primary representation system will kick in and you'll get a picture or a knowing of like, yeah, that person was awful to communicate with, or you will very quickly replay the question that I just asked. So thinking back, do you know anybody that you've had a lot of miscommunication with? And you're like, oh, yeah, thinking back, do I know anybody that I had any miscommunication with? And so the lead will indicate that somebody's playing back what you've just said, and you'll see it as a pattern. It'll be something that they do quite regularly. So this is just another, we're just going to make it a little bit more complex as we go along. I don't tend to focus too much on the lead representation. It happens so quickly. It's sort of like, boom, like it's happened so quickly. But if you were slowing this down, working with a client and eliciting their strategy on how they do something, how they get the success that they get, or how they're doing a problem that they get, just notice that the lead may indicate that they're just playing back the question. Okay, so I was just saying that all by memory, but here it is all nicely written for us. Let's have a quick look. Within the representational system, there is a lead and a primary system. The lead system is accessed instinctively and may not reflect the thinking pattern of the person. So for example, when asked a question, a person may instinctively look to auditory digital as they are repeating the question to themselves in their head before responding, whereas they may then move to their primary representational system to create the picture, should their primary system be visual. So the primary system is that which is preferred in communication. So when building rapport, matching rep system proves very, very powerful, and reflecting in the concept of pacing and leading. After you've worked out what their rep system is, you may actually start to use, I would encourage you to use the rep system to be able to create trust and rapport with somebody. All right, going in a little bit deeper. VR, the visual remember. So this is seeing images from memory, recalling things they have seen before. Some people access visual remembering by defocusing their eyes, and they'll actually look straight forward, almost as if they're looking through you. You'll see this with a lot of psychics and mediums when they're doing readings. Well, this is more visual create, either one. Visual create within psychic readings, they sort of glaze and look through you. But there are definitely visual remembered people who their eyes don't look up, they're just looking through you. It's quite fascinating to watch. Anyway, so questions to ask to shift a person's eyes to more visual remember was like, what color was your bedroom when you were growing up? What was your very first memory of seeing your mother's face? Out of all of your relatives, who has the whitest teeth? And you got all the relatives there, go, yep. Who is the tallest member of your extended family? So if you are playing with this, you'll be able to see that, yeah, that's where their eye patterns are going to be able to remember. So very, very, very important when you are coaching somebody to work out what's going on within their strategy. Then the visual construct. These are images of things that people have never seen before. When people are making it up in their head, or they are using the visual construct. So this is not necessarily lie detection. You would want a cluster of different patterns for lie detection, but this is going to be part of it, because if they're trying to tell you think about my children, if they skip school and stuff, and they're trying to create the picture, it's a lie to say, no, I was there, and we did baking at school in the food tech, and then blah, blah, you'll see it, and it'll be an indication that things aren't actually matching up to the truth. Because if it was true, they would be looking more to the visual remember of like, oh yeah, and then Zoe and I, we dropped an apple and we got in trouble. Like, it would be very different cluster of patterns. So questions to shift a person's eyes to more visual construct is, what would your boss or best friend look like in a clown outfit? Hmm. What would a giraffe look like with a lion's head? Imagine your father wearing your mother's clothes. If your mum was facing the front of your house, which way is south? I'd be like, north, south, east, west. You got me. I don't know. What would a horse with green polka dots look like? Hmm. Now, in coaching, this one is important if you're working with a highly visual person, because if you are creating that outcome that they want, something that they're moving towards, that goal, future pacing, be like, yeah, okay, so get in touch with that feeling or that sensation. What would it look like for you to step into that successful version of you? And as you're there in that successful version of you, what does it look like to have that abundance, to have that success? What does that look like? And so this is where the visual construct is very important with the way the unconscious mind works. Auditory remember. This is when you remember sounds or voices that you've heard before or things that you've said to yourself. So thinking about any client who's come to you with a level of trauma may, be repeating back the aggression that they heard from their ex-husband or something of that nature where, their dad yelled at them when they were little, and then therefore it means this is why I can't, put myself out there on social media. This is auditory remember is looking for the voices, the sounds. It doesn't even have to be a voice. It could be like, I heard the screeching of the car and then, XYZ. We're looking for the way that it sounded as they access that memory. So to get somebody to look in that direction, sorry, I've already done that one. What does your best friend's voice sound like? What does a stone falling onto a wooden floor sound like? What does Elvis's voice sound like? If you were to sing in a high voice, what would you sound like? And if you did something naughty as a child, what did your mother's voice sound like? It's quite interesting, scrolling on Facebook and coming across a post about Back to the Future. And, you see the characters and there's a quote down the bottom and immediately you can you can hear Marty's voice as he's saying that. So this is the auditory remember playing out. Auditory construct. So making up sounds that have not been heard before. So this is very much like that musician or getting in touch with that future successful version of yourself and hearing the applause like, yes, you were doing an amazing job. So the auditory construct is just as important as the visual construct when it's coaching and creating that future pacing. So questions to ask to shift a person's to auditory construct. So slow down by half the first few notes of your most favorite song. That one sounds a little bit complex to me. What does your best friend's voice sound like if they were more like Donald Duck? What would a green cannonball falling onto a wooden floor sound like? If a stapler could speak, what would it sound like? If a lion could sing, what would it sound like? And what would a saxophone sound like if it were played underwater? So immediately we're all sort of going to look towards our auditory construct to create that picture. To wrap that one up, if you were working with a client with trauma, you may actually utilize this construct to bring in Donald Duck's voice onto that trauma experience of, that weak person who made you feel so small, that bully. And it's just like in your mind, just make them sound like Mickey Mouse and how pathetic they sound when it's so insignificant. Like, so again, this is a very clever way to be able to use the power of the mind to take away the power of the bully and to give the client back their power. Kinesthetic. So when people access this pattern, they're feeling emotions or that physical sensation. The kinesthetic people are those brilliant energy healers, the empaths, where they're really feeling into the energy around them. the people who like to go out in nature and really feel into the sensation of just that calm vibration about being back in Mother Earth. The kinesthetic people are going to feel into an experience and then be able to work out if the words you're saying don't match the actual feeling or the intention. We're thinking about Reiki healing, we're thinking about theta healing, we're thinking about even the quantum healing, anything there that has that feeling sensation to it. And of course, a lot of the psychics use their feelings to feel into the energy. So we're not just talking about the nanas who like to hug. So when people are tapping into their kinesthetic, questions that you can ask them, like, what does it feel like to scratch your nails across a blackboard? Ugh. If you had jelly pumped into your pants, what would it feel like? What would it taste like to eat a whole dessert spoon of salt? Mm. If a lion instantly ran across your path in the Australian bush, what would you do? And what does it feel like when you're really happy? So the kinesthetic people, if they have had some level of trauma in their history, their unconscious mind is going to hold on to the feelings, and the feelings are going to create a lot of stress when it comes to putting themselves out there. So the kinesthetic is a really strong boundary on why people stay small in their business, because, you know, moving through the discomfort, the doubt, the confusion, the what ifs, the feelings make it quite difficult to, yes, we can heal those, we can shift those, but the kinesthetic doesn't give us a map out as much as the AD does, or as much as the visual does. So when you recognize a client who's feeling depressed, suicidal, very much in the lower quadrant there within the kinesthetic, it's going to be very difficult to access a solution from that point. We want to shift their eye patterns. We want them to have a look at what is it, if they had a magic wand, what is it that they want to create? And then being able to step into that feeling and then let that expand out so that there's a more empowering sensation in them. So hopefully that makes sense. The AD people. Now, we all have a level of AD. This is when you are talking to yourself, that inner dialogue, even that inner critic. When you go into the to-do list that needs to get done, we all have a level of AD. So when we are looking at eye patterns, what does your voice sound like in your head right now? What was the last time you argued with yourself? How many 7s in 28? Talk to yourself and tell me, where does the voice come from? What do you say to yourself when you do something right or succeed at something? And if there were 3 camels, 4 pigs, 8 lions, 9 rabbits, and 18 foxes, how many giraffes would there be? So the auditory digital people, as I've already stated, like criteria and instructions. And thinking about the kinesthetic people, the empaths, a lot of the time the empaths will actually keep their prices quite low because the numbers don't feel good. They they just keep themselves small or keep themselves in that space of how it feels to serve and help others. And so sometimes you have to get a kinesthetic person to really move into their AD and the criteria of they're giving this much, it's this value, and therefore it's this number. But naturally, that's not going to be a strategy that they move into easily. So just playing with this, how many people does it take to change a light globe? Well, the auditory digital people, the AD people, will say, let me think about that for one moment. The kinesthetic people will say, if I was honest with myself, I just don't feel like changing it. You know, ooh, the natural light feels really nice to me. The visual people will say, okay, cool, looks fine to me. And the auditory people will say, I think I heard someone calling me. Go run. So our rep systems will determine the way that we respond to different dilemmas. If you want to know more about eye patterns, I would encourage you to listen to the behavioural panel. These are some of the world's leading experts in body language and listening out for the communication in negotiation and in conflict, so on and so forth. So while NLP will give you that foundation of looking for eye patterns, listening for predicates, behavioral panel give you an identify how they use it in interrogation, in the legal system, in everyday world of listening out for what people are actually trying to communicate. So I would definitely check out the behavioral panel. Typically, that's what their YouTube thumbnails look like, and I've spent many hours listening to the behavioral panel and the way their minds work on putting all of these pieces of the puzzle together. So that concludes our training on the REP system. Clearly, we could go into a lot more detail, but I just want you to start to let that land and to start to recognize in the people that are around you, where are their eye patterns moving to? What predicates are they saying? Start listening out on the news when you're watching an interview. Is the interviewer more feeling based and they're trying to emote the feeling out of their interviewee? Or are they more AD and they want the facts and they want the criteria? And so you can see that the interview is sort of like going not so great. Listen out for the people that you live with about how their rep system works for them, and just start to play with it. When you notice that your partner is more visual and you provide more visual language, do they lean in more? Are they a lot easier to live with or not? Something to experiment with, because this is one of the strongest parts of trust and rapport building that you can master, and it'll take your business to the next level. So I'm Claire Chancellor from Be Your Purpose Coaching. Enjoy that fun training, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.